Hey up! Right, as you've probably noticed, I've been putting some additional videos out this month. I want to take some time off at the end of December, so I'm just, sticking a few extra videos out to try and keep the viewing figures up. Otherwise, the algorithm will have forgotten about me by January. Now, a couple of viewers alerted me about this occurrence at the rail station in Whitby yesterday while I was... No, it wasn't yes. Well, it's yesterday when I'm editing this, but it'll be the day before yesterday when you're watching this. So on Thursday, I was in the middle of editing Friday's video. Now, I very nearly sort of ditched Friday's video to reschedule it for another time, but a cursory glance at what had gone on sort of suggested to me that a little bit more digging needed doing before I pulled the trigger and put this video out, so I decided to leave it until today. There's no point going off half-cocked. So, prejudice towards motorcycles, or discrimination against motorcyclists, it's been around ever since I started riding in the early 80s. It's not a new thing. And you only have to look at the way that, our tests for a motorcycle and a car are structured to get your full licence. A motorcyclist, generally it's going to take at least a couple of years, a lot more money than a car driver to get his full licence. At some point he's going to be limited to a low-powered, slower motorcycle until he's proven his worth. Your average motorcyclist has to jump through multiple hoops and spend a lot more money to become a qualified motorcyclist. Quite by contrast, a young man or a young lady at the age of 17 can fast-track through the driving test, spending a fraction of the money that a motorcyclist has to spend, and then literally the same day that they pass their test, especially if they have a rich mummy or daddy, they can theoretically jump into a high-powered Ferrari or Porsche and drive quite legally without any other barriers in the way. Now, an out-of-control motor car on the road, high-powered or not, is a far more deadly weapon than a motorcycle, and there's barely a week goes past when we don't hear of some tragedy where, a young lass or a young lad showing off to his mate sitting in the back of his car has managed to kill not just himself, but all his passengers as well, or even other road users. Yet there's never any revisions on the law relating to driving motor cars. It's always be the same. It's a fairly easy, fast-track procedure if you want to drive a car. And I've always thought that is a very clear-cut example of government discrimination against motorcyclists. We are somehow, in some way, lower beings. We have to be protected from ourselves. We can't be trusted. Not like a car driver can. And so the wholesale slaughter of young car drivers and their passengers on British roads continues. But it's not just the government that is discriminatory against motorcyclists. A lot of businesses and members of the public are as well. I remember quite well, I think it was about 1984, I went on a 7 or 10 day touring trip around the Lake District with a girlfriend of the time. Now, it was a very ill-conceived trip, to be quite honest. The day before I was due to go on annual leave, I'd been injured on duty. I had a cracked rib, and I'd learned a very valuable lesson that day, not to try and tackle a crowbar-wielding maniac in a bar on your own. You should always wait for backup. Anyway, I should really have gone on sick, but back in those days, you had to be available while you're on sick leave for a visit from your supervision if they deemed it necessary. And we wanted to go away, so I didn't go on sick. I continued with my annual leave that had been booked well in advance, and off we went to the Lake District. Big mistake. I was in agony all the way there. It was pouring with rain when we put the tent up. It continued to rain consistently for 2 days, by which time everything we owned that we'd taken with us was soaking wet through. And on the morning of the third day, Me still being in agony with my ribs, we decided it was time to sort of cut our losses and go home. Now, I had to make the journey home in sort of small hops because, like I said, I was in pain. We were soaking wet through. The girlfriend that was with me was in tears because she was so cold and uncomfortable. And only about 20 miles from the campsite, I spotted a pub. It was getting around about lunchtime, and I decided that we'd stop off, get warmed up and dried out a little bit, have something to eat, and then reassess the situation from there. Now, I do vaguely remember seeing some sort of posters or notices up to the right of the main entrance doorway as I walked in. I didn't pay any attention to them. I didn't really see why I should at the time. My mind was on other things. We went in. I walked up to the bar. I got my wallet out and opened it, ready to, order a hot drink and something to eat. My girlfriend went and sat down by the fire to try and get warmed up. And it was one of those pubs where it was just full of sort of walkers and ramblers, and they were all doing the same thing. They'd all come into shelter from the rain and get the clothes dried out. Before I could do anything else, this guy that had previously been collecting glasses came steaming over to me. Big fat sort of landlord character, red-faced, really angry, and he started shouting at me that bikers weren't allowed in his pub, ordering me to get out immediately. Now, I shouldn't have done it, but I was in one of those places where I just didn't care at that point in time. And my wallet was open with my warrant card in it. I mean, we didn't have badges in those days. It was just a little printed card with your photograph and your credentials and that you were a police officer. I held it up to his face and calmly said to him, "Can you tell me when your licence is next up for renewal, sir?" I'll never forget the look on his face. It was priceless. He immediately backed down and apologised and explained to me that he'd had trouble with bikers in the past. And as it happened, we didn't stay because the girl that was with me, she didn't feel comfortable. We found another pub a few miles down the road. But I've never forgotten that. That was a very vocal and public display of prejudice towards me, simply because my chosen mode of transport was a motorcycle. As a motorcyclist, you sort of get used to this behaviour. As I've said in previous videos, I tend to try not to dress like your archetypal motorcyclist these days. It does ease things a little bit in that department. And I think the last time I encountered it was at a post office just at the end of the pandemic. They had a sign up in the window saying that you still had to have a face covering on. I had to take a package in to get it sent back to Motorn, I think. I didn't have a snood or anything like that, so my helmet formed my face covering, if you like, so I thought I'd be okay with this on. Grumpy, middle-aged lady, presumably the post mistress, refused to serve me until I took my helmet off. Now, it's an open face helmet with a visor on it. You could see my face in full. Everyone else in there was wearing a face covering that covered up 2/3 of the face. And I asked her, why do I have to take my helmet off? And she said, it's for the safety of my customers and my staff. I mean, I pointed out to her that the sign at the doorway when you came in said you had to have a face covering, which she agreed you have to have a face covering. And I asked her to explain to me why taking my helmet off was going to make her staff and her customers safer. And she said, it's because you're a motorcyclist. Take your helmet off. In other words, the rules for me were different to the rules that everybody else had to adhere to because I ride a motorcycle. And this was rife during the pandemic. There were multiple reports of motorcyclists being refused service at petrol stations and in shops. Because in order to comply with the current laws, they were leaving the helmets on instead of covering 2/3 of the face with a face mask. It was clear and widespread discrimination against motorcyclists just because they are motorcyclists. Now, there are a whole host of laws in this country designed to protect minority groups from prejudice and discrimination. And I would argue that motorcyclists are a minority group in the UK. You know, compared to motorists, car drivers, we represent a tiny percentage of road users. We're a minority group. Yet, although all these anti-discriminatory laws exist, it seems socially acceptable to discriminate against or be prejudiced towards motorcyclists because they choose to ride a motorcycle. And let's be clear, there are a lot of motorcyclists who ride bikes not just because it's their choice, but because that's the only form of transport that's within their means. Which brings us into this recent occurrence at Whitby railway station, where motorcycles have been banned from entering the car park. Now, last night I had a little chat with Neil Liversidge, the chairman of the UK Motorcycle Action Group, just to get their take on this situation. And they're of the same mind as me. This is clear discrimination against motorcyclists. Neil told me that he is now personally dealing with this matter to put pressure on Northern Rail, who are the franchisees that run that section of railway, in order to get this unfair discriminatory rule removed. I haven't visited Whitby now for about 10 years. You know, it's a lovely little town, but it's littered with narrow streets and roads. Car parking is minimal, and, you know, for me personally, I just don't consider visiting the place worth the hassle. Whitby rail station sort of serves rail traffic from other parts of the country into Whitby, and obviously from Whitby out to other parts of the country. Being on the coast, it's a terminus line. It doesn't go anywhere else except out of Whitby in one direction. From the pictures that I've seen online, and I'll leave a link to, I think it's the Scarborough Echo, I might be wrong, but it's the Scarborough something, a news article that they published the other day. Looks like it has a reasonably large car park, which, you know, just a rough estimate looking at the photographs, I would say it probably accommodates maybe 100 cars. There are two sides to this story. From one angle, I can see Northern Railway's point in that the car park is being misused by motorcyclists. The car park is there for the use of people that are using the railway network. But adjacent to it is a cafe which has become a well-known biker haunt called the Whistle Stop Cafe. And inevitably, motorcyclists using the cafe and not the rail network have been parking the motorcycles there and may be causing a bit of a nuisance. That's not clear from the article. There have been accusations of littering and, of course, motorcyclists using an entire car parking space for one motorcycle and limiting the number of spaces available to car drivers. But there is absolutely no data or information that I can find to ascertain the number of cars using that car park that are not actually using the rail network. I mean, you know, I would be happy to bet that there will be a number of cars parked in that car park per day that are parking there simply because it's convenient for Whitby town and not because they're using the railway. But real information, unfortunately, is not available. Now, the idea of this car park is it's there for commuters so they can park the car, use the train, and then at the end of the day when they return to Whitby, the car is there, they get in it and they go home. Also, it's worth mentioning that this is a tourist line, in that it does provide sort of short-haul return train journeys for tourist purposes, sightseeing purposes. So I would imagine it's not unusual for vehicles to just park up there short term. I don't know how long these tourist trips are, 2 or 3 hours, and then return to the vehicles and go. So some of those vehicles will be short stay, they won't be there for the entirety of the day. And that is likely to include motorcyclists, not just car drivers. Now, the photograph put up online showed a virtually empty car park. I don't know just how busy this car park generally is, but what is traditionally accepted as biker night at the cafe is from sort of 6 p.m. onwards on Thursday evenings. So I would imagine for the most part that car park would be pretty empty at that time of the day on a Thursday. Now, Northern Rail, admittedly, they have a right to protect their business. They need to make sure that that car park is available for rail users whenever they need to use it. And it's clear that there has been some abuse of the actual parking facilities by motorcyclists. That's in no doubt. Now, I'm not sure if they've got any sort of car park validation system in place. I don't know how they've gathered this information that motorcyclists solely are abusing the car park, because, you will get people turning up and parking temporarily, waiting to collect a passenger or drop a passenger off. I don't know how they would monitor that. But I've got little doubt that, especially in the summer, there will be a proportion of legitimate motorcyclists using that car park because they are using the rail line. Northern Rail have obviously decided that they have a problem with motorcyclists and are ignoring any problems that they might have with car drivers. So, in a sensible world, I would say their first line of action here would be to get some sort of surveillance system installed that would allow them to monitor the car park and find a way of stopping sort of ad hoc use by people just wanting somewhere to park when they're not using the railway. Secondly, what they should have done to accommodate motorcycles is put a motorcycle parking bay in. I mean, it's only going to take up 2, maybe 3 car parking spaces. It would be able to accommodate quite a number of motorcycles and would immediately alleviate these perceived problems that they have to some degree. Instead, what they've decided to do, because bikers are a minority, they're not going to kick up a fuss, nobody's going to be bothered, they've banned motorcycles altogether. And if you enter the car park on a motorcycle, it's an automatic £50 fine. And I'm presuming that in order to facilitate that, they must have some sort of CCTV in action on the car park. So, why they couldn't use that to manage legitimate use by motorcycles is beyond me. Clearly, some bigwig at Northern Rail has just made the decision that motorcyclists are subhuman, they're not real citizens, they don't matter, so we're just going to ban them from entering the car park, whether they're there legitimately or not. That is clear discrimination. Now, if that's not bad enough, what does gall me is that the railway station and presumably the car park is not owned by Northern Rail. It's actually owned by Network Rail, which is a subsidiary of the Department for Transport. It's a publicly owned premises. And actually, I can't conclusively prove it because my research sort of suggests but then keeps leading to a dead end. I believe Northern Rail is in itself actually a subsidiary of the Department for Transport. I might be wrong on that, but some sources suggest that it is, which means, if that's the case, Northern Rail is a government body, a publicly owned company. But if that's not the case, they are still just franchisees, the sitting tenants on that land, publicly owned land funded by the taxpayer. And although I'm sure that as part of that tenancy or franchise they will be awarded certain property rights, rights to use that property, surely that doesn't mean that they can use that property in a discriminatory way to a minority form of transport. There are other routes they could have taken to solve this problem other than the one they've chosen. And in my opinion, and it is just my opinion, you may disagree with me, the Department for Transport, which is part of our government, is complicit in allowing them to be discriminatory towards motorcyclists. Parallels to a conversation I had with a friend of mine earlier this year. He's run a retail business, a shop, for decades, but then 10 years ago he decided to move premises. Now, the entrance into the shop was slightly raised by, I don't know, 8 inches a foot from street level. So the council, according to the local bylaws, insisted that it had to put a ramp in for wheelchair access. Fair enough. But in order to build this concrete ramp complete with all the rails etc. necessary to comply with the local council's regulations, it cost him near enough £10,000, and he asked me to guess how many wheelchair users have been in his shop in the last sort of 9 years that he'd been there. The number was 0, because it's simply not that sort of shop. No wheelchair users have entered his shop or used that ramp in the 10 years since he installed it, but it has to be there because it would be an act of discrimination not to allow them to have access. The foundation of the UK's legal system is that we are deemed innocent until proven guilty. Yet clearly Northern Rail in this instance has chosen to deem all motorcyclists as guilty simply because they ride motorcycles. And that's been condoned by the Department of Transport as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm going to leave a link to this Scarborough Echo article on this subject. It's not a very long one. It's 4 or 5 minute read. I'll also endeavour to find an email address for the complaints department for Northern Rail. I think we should all write into them and let them know politely what we think. And just bear in mind, the people in the complaints department are not the people that made this decision. They're simply the people that will be dealing with the complaints. So, keep it calm and polite. Also, among many other things, the Motorcycle Action Group is fighting our corner for us on this, and many other problems that motorcyclists face. Now might be a good time to certainly go along to their website and see what the latest is, but also consider becoming a member of MAG. The strength in numbers. Again, I'll put a link in the video description down below. Now, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really appreciate it. I would also appreciate it if you would leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber, and or you can, if you like, help this channel out in other ways by subscribing to my Patreon page or leave a super thanks via the super thanks button down below. Either way, it's much appreciated. I am of course going to be back next week, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.